Sure. I'm a professor of astronomy at the University of Arizona and associate dean in the College of Science. And I was blown away by those images. They're amazing. And I guess I had just a couple of takes on that and the whole issue of dark skies. So as an astronomer, obviously, it's the currency of astronomy if you're working in optical wavelengths. And in the 30 years I've been here observing, we've seen degradation in the skies. Pima County has one of the strictest lighting ordinances in the country. But when you're at, say, Mount Hopkins, the lights of Tucson are now almost eclipsed by Phoenix, much further away, but Phoenix is going to be, it's heading for New York and LA population and a lot of light. In the other direction, Nogales is bright and rivals Tucson. So, we have been forced, astronomers here have been forced down to Chile to do a lot of our frontier observations. That's a long way to go. Sometimes you're forced to use the Hubble Space Telescope because Earth orbit is darker than any terrestrial location, but that's a very expensive way to get data. So as the take of an astronomer, we've seen the impact on this, and even in Hawaii they've seen the impact. As an educator, I would echo the initial little poll done. This is a very self-selected audience, so I ask, I teach big classes at the U of A, 18 to 20-year-olds, and pretty much every time I ask them, how many of you have ever seen the Milky Way? And they're about half Arizona kids, half from all around the country. And the percentage is always about the same, it's 10%. So 90% of young kids, high school, college-age kids, have never seen the Milky Way. It's kind of amazing. And not amazing, though, because they mostly live in cities or suburbs. Suburbs are as bad as a city, really, if you want to see the sky. So that's something being lost from the human experience. Then just at a purely personal level, I got my socks knocked off, if you like, because I'd known Arizona skies, they're great. But the first time I went to Chile, I was just getting oriented. The sun had set, you would get your night before your first observing night where you get to watch over the shoulder of the previous observer. And I gathered my stuff and I was just standing outside, waiting to get dark adapted. There was no moon. And I was just sort of looking at my materials, the folders that I was going to take up to the telescope. And after a couple of minutes, I kind of noticed something strange. And I noticed that the folder I had in my hand was casting a shadow. And it was the Milky Way casting a shadow. And I looked up, and that was like a gobsmacking experience for an astronomer. And my last take on it, I'll give you the cosmic take. We think there are about 10 billion habitable worlds in the Milky Way and trillions more in other galaxies. And so on many of those habitable worlds, there's probably life, intelligent life. There may be creatures smart enough to figure out their place in the universe and even have astronomy. But if you actually take the totality of habitable worlds and look at their actual situations, we're still kind of special, because most of those habitable Earth-like worlds are a little bigger and heavier than the Earth, and they're likely to have bigger and thicker and more opaque atmospheres. So our atmosphere is a little special. Most of those habitable worlds are orbiting red dwarfs, not sun-like stars, and so any creatures that evolve in them will have infrared detecting sensors, not eyes detecting visible light. So they'll be immune from the beauty of optical astronomy and the stars in the sky just by natural selection. And then in terms of geography, the sun is in a kind of outer suburb of the edge of a spiral arm, 2/3 the way out in the Milky Way. Most of the carbon in the Milky Way and most of the habitable worlds are going to be piled up somewhere near the center of the Milky Way. And in a sense, they got too much, that those skies will be so blazing with light that they won't ever see galaxies or know they live in an extragalactic universe. So we're in this Goldilocks zone, this sweet spot. And if I were estimating, probably 95 to 98% of all the other possible habitable worlds with astronomers or sky-gazing creatures on them don't have it as good as we do. So maybe it's not the best of all possible worlds, but it's pretty close.
Hi, my name is Marie Long. I'm the Associate Director for Conservation Education and Science at the Arizona Sonora Desert Museum. I'm happy to be here, and I really enjoyed that film as well. I've actually had the opportunity, like probably many of you, that have visited a lot of those special places, and they're pretty remarkable. So just a little bit about my background. I've been working for desert museums for almost 20 years, learning about desert ecology, teaching it, and it's definitely a passion of mine. And I'm curious of how many people here in the audience are familiar with the Desert Museum. Oh, great. I was going to talk about what we're all about, but I don't think I need to do that. So you're probably wondering, what is someone here from the Desert Museum here to talk about light pollution, and how does it relate to my work? And so I just wanted to spend a few minutes sharing with you that, a big piece of what we do at the museum is education. And we have about 400,000 visitors a year that come to our institution, and a lot of them are Tucson community members, but we also have people from around the world. And so it's a real opportunity to connect folks on these important light pollution issues. So some things I just wanted to make all of you aware of, if you weren't already familiar with. We have a wonderful evening program series called Cool Summer Nights, and that starts in mid-May and runs through Labor Day. We're open till 10 o'clock at night, and that's where we really take the opportunity to interpret nocturnal ecology, and we also bring attention to our incredible evening skies. So we have our docents that interpret a program we call Celestial Wonders, and they set up telescopes every Saturday evening and point out the stars. And I don't know about you, but I can remember the first time as a kid, my dad bought me an old Sears telescope. And the first time I looked at the moon, it was a pretty magical experience. So we have a lot of people, that's their first time to have that experience. We've done some other collaborations too that for years now, we've collaborated with the International Dark Sky Association, Kit Peak, NOAO, and I've done a lot of collaborative work. We actually have astronomy-themed evenings, so we have special programming trying to bring awareness of how people in the community can make a difference. So that's a really important piece. Another thing that I just wanted to share that was a pretty neat program that I had the privilege of organizing, that it really makes me think that it might be a good opportunity to do this in the future, is we brought Western science astronomers from the Kit Peak National Observatory and indigenous community members from the Dene or Navajo tribe and a community member from the Hawaiian Islands. And we hosted a special, I guess you could call it a star party, at the Tohono O'odham Cultural Center and Museum in Tapawa, just west of here. And they have incredibly dark skies. And it was a really lovely evening. It was for community members and Desert Museum staff and volunteers. And it was an opportunity for different people to share different world viewpoints of what the stars meant, how they used it for navigation, and how it was just a really rich part still today of their cultural heritage. So the last thing that I just wanted to end with is the Desert Museum. We really pride ourselves in teaching people and inspiring them to live in harmony with the natural world and wanting to protect this beautiful place that we call home, the Sonoran Desert. But also, I think it's a real opportunity for us to spend more time talking about conserving our night skies, because we're really privileged here, and I think we're in a perfect place to be able to connect with our international guests. So thank you very much.
Hi, everybody. My name is John Barrentine. I'm the Director of Conservation with IDA, which I'm glad that Harun and Gavin gave us a nice introduction, and especially happy to see everybody here today to take this in and to hear about the issue that is so important to us with the organization and learn a little bit about what we're doing to try to preserve night skies everywhere. I think one of the things that really stands out for me about the work that they have done with SkyGlow is, and you've seen this today firsthand, is that they have presented this really as a very sensory experience. That the night sky and being in places where you can see the night sky in its natural form is something that transcends just the sense of vision. There's sounds that you hear at night. It's a different world than during the day. And we have come to learn so much about how it is interconnected with the biology of our world, up to and including us as humans. And so it's become very critical that we devote as many of the resources as we can to try to improve the situation around the world. Specifically, what I do for the organization that helps contribute to that is that I run a program called International Dark Sky Places. And since 2001, we have certified 98 locations worldwide for the quality of their night skies, but also for the efforts that local people have undertaken in those places to preserve them. So it's not just about going and finding the dark places in the world and handing out certificates and handshakes and patting people on the back, but really holding them accountable in the long run for the survival of these conditions and promoting the situations where things could actually get better over time. And we think that with a few very simple undertakings that people really can make a difference, and we're seeing that. And the program now is in 17 countries and every continent except for Antarctica. And don't think that I'm not coming for you, Antarctica, because you're a very dark place. But it's important to note, as Haroon mentioned during the presentation, that we not only deal with the places that are already dark, like national parks and places like that, but also communities, because we think that public policy can be a very effective way at changing some of the lighting practices throughout the world. And now, as the program approaches its 100th designation within just a matter of a couple of weeks, it's worth noting that there are a number of designated dark sky places right here, even in southern Arizona. So if you want to go have the experience of being in a dark place that is protected for that purpose, you need go no further than a couple of our local state parks, such as Oracle State Park and Karcher Cavern State Park, which are both certified as part of the program. And look for more coming from Arizona in the years to come. So again, I thank you all for coming today, and I hope that you've learned something from the experience and really gathered something from seeing these incredible visuals and knowing that this is really what motivates a lot of people to become involved at some level. And we hope that there's a takeaway really in all of this for everybody. So thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Marie. Thanks, John. And now it's your turn. I'm going to actually try and bring the mic out so folks can hear the questions as they come up. We've got about 15 minutes, so please fire away. Who has a question they would like to ask this distinguished panel? Show of hands. There we go, in the back.
My question actually has to do with the film, so you may not be able to answer this, but I see a distinction, or didn't hear a distinction, between time-lapse and the star streaks, because there were some video images where the stars didn't streak and some where they did. Can anybody speak to that at all? I think I understand the difference, but I just wondered if...
I think I understand it too. The general time lapse, as they described, the filmmakers described, were based on 20-second roughly exposures stitched together, with intervals, so to give the illusion of pure motion, and so they could cover hours by stitching together individually short exposures, and in 20 or 30 seconds. You don't make a streak. That the motion of the stars is imperceptible. So that's the basic technique they're using. In the overlaid star trails, those corresponded to much longer exposures because a star obviously will trace 360 degrees in 24 hours. It's only dark for 10 of those hours, so probably they had several hours of exposure. So they were sort of layering two different levels of exposure to get their total effect.
Having been fortunate enough to go down to Chile, I agree with you, Chris, that the night skies down there are pretty mind-blowing, particularly since you can really see into the core of the Milky Way from down there. Right now, all the effort is being made in the Atacama Desert. For how long are the projections that you'll have good dark skies down there, and what other locations on the planet are currently being investigated for possible observatories?
The Chilean observatories are protected at the level of the government, the Chilean government. So the astronomy enterprise in Chile is worth about $150 to $200 million a year to the Chilean government in terms of employment and infrastructure and hardware. So it's not a major part of their economy, but they're extremely proud of it. So at the government level, they have they don't have the same sort of statutory arrangements that we do in this country, but they've protected these locations. The biggest nominal threat to some of the observatories is that they only lease large amounts of land from other private entities, tens of thousands of acres, and some of those areas have mining interests, uranium, for example. So the concern of a couple of the mid-latitude Chilean observatories is that the mining companies could call on their claims and start mining, and that would obviously bring light. That hasn't happened, and there's been heavy lobbying with the Chilean government that it not be allowed to happen, so it's just not become an issue. The northern and the mid-latitude observatories have La Serena, they have Coquimbo. There are towns within 50 or 100 miles where there's significant but slight light. Atacama is completely dark. San Pedro de Atacama is 10,000 people maybe, and it's 120 miles away from Alma, so they are not looking at any significant light. And just briefly, to where the biggest future super dark places are, we've heard allusion to Antarctica. That is Dome C and Dome A, which are at 8,000 or 9,000 feet. And although you think it might be wet or moist because it's ice, the ice is as hard as granite. The humidity is single digits. There's wind. That's the biggest enemy there. But it's laminar flow, super smooth air. So Antarctica is always going to be dark. And then the biggest undeveloped dark site that will be developed is on the Tibetan Plateau. The Chinese are planning an indeterminate size, but 10 plus, maybe 20, 30 meters. They have the money to do it. Telescope. And they've been site testing on the edge of the Tibetan Plateau at about 16 or 17,000 feet for almost a decade. It's exceptional site. It's super dark and will always be that way. So that's probably going to happen in the next decade.
Could you tell us where some close-in places are that would kind of qualify for the dark skies qualification? And also, if you went onto the ADA website, would there be a place that would tell where some of the other places in the world are that would qualify?
Absolutely. If you go to our website, you can see a map with an overlay that marks where all of the existing dark sky places are that have been designated around the world. They're not on our website, but there are some other websites that show satellite imagery of the Earth at night, where there were some images during the presentation today where they color code the maps with the amount of light that the satellites see. So we have a pretty good idea with these satellites looking down on the Earth about where the darker places are. It's helpful to have measurements on the ground, which is part of the designation process, so that we have that validation, so that we do know actually from the ground how bright or dark the location is. And as especially the large map of the United States that the filmmakers showed really gives you a sense of where those places are that are still left, and they tend to be out here in the West, almost inevitably. Alaska is a place that we don't have any designations yet, but I'm working on Denali National Park right now. Hawaii is another good example. They showed Mauna Kea. We're working on Hawaii Volcanoes National Park. But there are these sort of large reservoirs of darkness that are still left in the West, and those are the best candidates for the future. Fewer options in the East, although one of our designation categories is called a dark sky community, which is what the city of Flagstaff is, and some other communities in northern Arizona. And that designation category doesn't actually contain a requirement for sky brightness. The thinking is that you don't necessarily start out dark, but by applying effective public policy, that over time that you could get darker. And so that's a case where we may in the future pick up more communities in the east, but I think the window of time where we could be looking at dark sky parks and that sort of thing in the eastern U.S. is that window is beginning to close. And then elsewhere in the world, it's kind of the situation is the same in Europe. We're starting to look to other places like the developing world, Africa, interior China, parts of South America, for example, as the really good candidates for the future.
I live on the east side of town by the Rincon Mountains, and I've been here for 20 years and have watched the degradation of Tucson. Is there anything being done to switch Tucson back to the other way again?
Split this one, Chris. Actually, and I'm real sensitive to what you're saying about the degradation over Tucson, because it's this is a place that I have lived in on and off for about 25 years, and I've seen that taking place myself, with the knowledge that relative to a lot of other cities this size, Tucson is actually doing quite well, which may sound shocking, but again, we have a really progressive outdoor lighting policy here, which is intended in part to protect the observatories. And it's not something that we'll be able to stem that tide indefinitely, as Chris said. I mean, the city is going to continue to grow, and with it will come more light. And there's a day of reckoning probably in the future where even the best outdoor lighting ordinance isn't going to be able to hold that back anymore. But I think we've done a pretty remarkable job already. One specific point that I would make about that, as you probably noticed in the last about year and a half to almost 2 years, is that the city has swapped out all of our streetlights from the old kind of orangey sodium vapor lamps to white LEDs. And that's something that's a sort of a daily concern of ours at IDA because of the rapid proliferation of this technology into lots of different parts of the world. And there are really good ways to do LED lighting, and there are lots of terrible ways to do it. And what City of Tucson did when it put in its lights is it was very mindful about the impact that those lights might have on the observatories. And so not only did it keep the kind of color or the glow of the lights more on the warm side and away from the cooler colors that tend to scatter that light more effectively away from the city, but you might not notice it, but they also decreased the intensity of the street lighting system by a factor of 4. The lights are much less bright than they were before they were converted to LED. And I just, in the last 6 months, finished a little study where we looked at some data before and after the conversion, and we found that there's a very slight decrease in the amount of sky glow over Tucson after the retrofit to LED. And so that's an illustration that when done properly, it is possible to actually, in a small way at least, reduce the amount of light pollution that a city emits, because it turns out that a lot of the light that a city like Tucson gives off is in the form of street lighting. So it's maybe not perfect, but I do give Tucson some credit for being ahead of the curve on this, and I'm hoping that other cities will look at that as a model and start to try to reproduce it. Oh, Phoenix too. Got to give Phoenix credit. They didn't go with the dimming, but they went with the warmer color of light as well. We'll see in the long run whether that's going to produce any effect or not.
So I hate to be the timekeeper here, but I've got time for one more question, and John and Marie and Chris will be here to chat with afterwards. Because if I don't wrap it up, Jeff is going to cut off my lifetime supply of popcorn here at the loft, and I am not going to let that happen. So let me go back up here. I'm going to give the question to her, if that's okay, sir. Yeah. So.
Thank you. This is for the person representing the Desert Museum. I'm sorry, I forgot your name.
Marie, yes.
Marie. Could you tell us a little bit more about the work that you're doing at the Desert Museum related to dark skies, and also if you have noticed any kind of response from the crowd, and especially from kids who come and are able to experience that?
Sure. So, yeah, we do a lot of work. Some other projects I didn't mention is we have a lot of, we host Star Party programming at the museum, and then we run an environmental education program where we take both adults and kids out in the field And I don't know how many of you have had that experience of camping in the desert, waking up in the middle of the night and really looking at the stars and, having those aha moments. And so we're making those connections with youth. That's a really big push. And the other thing I didn't mention, too, is we're doing a lot of collaborative projects with national parks. And we haven't really talked about Sonora, Mexico, but the heart of the Sonoran Desert is at the Pinacate Biosphere Reserve. And we have been working collaboratively with them for many years. And we've been doing some initiatives of getting the communities more connected to the park. So that's been going really well. And then we're doing a lot of conservation work. But, I think this movie, this film has really inspired me. I think that we're going to definitely, we have 300 interpretive volunteers, we're going to be able to take this on as an initiative for the summer, and maybe even consider some daytime interpretations where we can really bring awareness to have people wanting to make a difference in their communities.
We love that answer. Let's give these folks a big round of applause, please. Thank you.